Welcome to another edition of the Radio Coffee House Show, where Jesus meets coffee meets talk radio. And the next one starts right now. How's it going, everybody? Clint Armitage with the Radio Coffee House. Thanks for coming back and thanks for listening in. I am in Pioneer, California, and it's actually pretty cool over here. Now, it's the desert, but it is a town that was actually built as a movie set. So you walk through town, or Pioneer Town, and it's an actual Old West town. You know, it's set up for stores now. There's like the mercantile, the saloon, and these different traders places and stuff like that. And so it's a little walkable little old Western town. And that's kind of the draw. And they still do filming out here for Western movies and stuff like that. And the weather's really great and the views are awesome here in the desert. It's really cool. And it's not too hot. So it's a real good time to be out here. So today's show is really awesome. So our show today is all about God's miraculous savior of the Israelites when the Egyptians were going after them. The Egyptians let the Israelites go, right? They believed that God was going to destroy them, or at least they had some of those things happen, like the plagues and all that stuff, to believe like, okay, this God may do something, so let's let him go. And then once they let the Israelites go, Pharaoh said, hey, what am I doing? And they started going after him again. So Pharaoh's army and Pharaoh started going after the Israelites until they came up to the Red Sea, and they were stuck between two hard places here. They're a rock and a hard place, right? Because they got the Red Sea in front of them and they got the Egyptians behind them. They had mountains around the sides and the Egyptians were coming. And then what did God do? God saved them with a miracle. Told Moses to go ahead and part the Red Sea. And after he did that, Israelites go walking through on dry ground. And then Pharaoh says, yeah, let's follow him. And then when the Pharaoh's army went through, the water comes crashing and takes out all the army. So why am I retelling this story? Well, because another archaeological expedition has proved the Bible true once again. So this dive team that went out in the end of 2024 actually found all the evidence, all this archaeological evidence along this path underwater, where they found chariot wheels, they found parts of chariots, they found horse bones. I mean, it is a full-on path of all these dead people, horses, chariots. I mean, it's an incredible find. Again, it was done in 2024. But what happened originally was decades prior to that. It was like in the 70s. A guy by the name of Ron Wyatt, he is a nurse in Tennessee, but he has this passion to discover all these biblical, adventures, do these biblical adventures, and find out how we can prove the Bible is real through archaeological finds, right? Like a Indiana Jones kind of thing. Anyways, he went out in the 70s trying to find this path through the Red Sea where the Egyptians were drowned when the water came crashing down on them. The path that was dry when the Israelites went through. Well, he finds this place, right? He finds all the archaeological evidence. He's filming all this stuff. Of course, back then it's not as good, but he maps it out. He finds all the evidence. So back then, nobody believed him. Nobody supported him. And again, it was just him and his own money trying to do this, right? So, 50 years later, decades later, a team with about $10 million comes in with all this high-tech gear and they go through his stuff, follow his maps, and they actually find everything. And now it's documented with high-tech gear. So it is awesome. Anyways, I'm all getting into this, and this is just the intro, man. I'm so excited. So let me play the audio clip and maybe audio clips here of this new documentary, or at least the information about what they found in late 2024 to confirm everything that Ron Wyatt had found decades earlier. All right, it's super exciting. So let's listen to these clips and then we'll talk about the actual biblical account. We'll actually go through that. All right, let's do this.
The $10 million secret. So here's the deal. In late 2024, a small, highly secretive team of divers, engineers, and underwater archaeologists launched a private expedition. This wasn't a university-funded project you read about in a boring journal. This was a quiet, covert operation funded by private backers to the tune of over $10 million. They were equipped with technology that most archaeological teams can only dream of: advanced side-scan sonar, military-grade remotely operated vehicles, ROVs, with high-definition 4K cameras and hypersensitive magnetometers. They weren't just looking for old pots or a stray anchor, they were looking for something specific, something that mainstream science insisted did not exist. They were looking for the lost army of the Pharaoh. For decades, rumors and amateur reports had pointed to a very specific spot in the Red Sea's Gulf of Aqaba. The stories, often dismissed as fantasy, told of coral-encrusted chariot wheels, scattered bones, and the physical remnants of the Egyptian army from the biblical Exodus. For just as long, mainstream Egyptology and archaeology had laughed off these claims. They called it pseudoscience, a religious hoax, and wishful thinking. But this new team had a map. It was a map based on those old, ridiculed claims, and they had the technology to see what no one else could, or perhaps what no one else wanted to see. They started their search in a wide grid. For days, the sonar pulsed into the deep, scanning the seabed. Then the sonar operator saw it: strange, symmetrical anomalies on his screen. These shapes were not natural rock formations. They were round, precise, and most chillingly, they were arranged in a long, linear trail. The team was stunned. The shapes looked exactly like wheels, hundreds of them. They deployed the ROV, a small submarine robot, sending it down into the dark, cold water hundreds of feet below the surface. The sub's high-powered lights cut through the gloom. At first, there was nothing but sand and rock. And then, suddenly, there it was, emerging from the sand, a perfectly round shape, completely covered in coral. It was, without a doubt, a wheel, an ancient spoked chariot wheel. As the ROV glided forward, its robotic arm brushing away the silt, another came into view, and another, and another. It was a debris field, a massive one. The site stretched for nearly 1.5 miles. This was it. The team knew they had to go down themselves. This was too big to just observe through a camera. Elite deep-sea divers, many of them ex-military, prepared for a difficult and dangerous dive. As they descended into the silent deep, the sheer scale of the cataclysm became terrifyingly clear. This was not a single shipwreck. This was a military catastrophe, frozen in time. The sea floor was a war zone. It was littered with the remains of a fleeing or perhaps charging army. They saw wheels with 4 spokes, 6 spokes, and even 8 spokes. This detail is a massive wow factor. Why? Because these specific designs match perfectly the different types of chariots used by the Egyptian army during the New Kingdom period. The 4-spoked wheels were older, but the 6 and 8-spoked wheels were the new, high-tech, stable designs used by elite warriors and the pharaoh himself. Finding them all jumbled together was a snapshot of the entire Egyptian chariot corps. But it wasn't just wheels. They found twisted metal fragments that looked like axles. They found what appeared to be the tangled, rectangular remains of the chariot cabs themselves, now just piles of corroded bronze and petrified wood, all fused to the seafloor by centuries of relentless coral growth. What most people don't realize is that the divers reported an overwhelming, eerie feeling of dread. They were swimming through an underwater graveyard, and then they found the bones. Tangled within the chariot debris, just as the old reports had claimed, were bone shards. Hundreds, possibly thousands of them. Some were clearly animal, the skulls, ribs, and femurs of horses, exactly where they would be if they were still harnessed to the chariots. But others were unmistakably human. Spines, pelvic bones, and fragments of skulls all mixed together in a chaotic, terrible jumble. This wasn't just an equipment dump. This was the final watery resting place of hundreds, maybe thousands, of elite soldiers and their animals who all perished in a single, sudden, and violent event. The crazy part? One of the divers, sweeping a high-powered light over a mound of coral, caught a faint, unnatural glimmer. Beneath the crust, something was shining, a dull, unmistakable golden sheen. This matched the most incredible, most dismissed claim of all, that among the army's wreckage was a single gold-plated chariot wheel, perhaps belonging to a high-ranking general or even the pharaoh. They couldn't touch it. The coral had locked it in place. To try and remove it would be to destroy it. The team documented everything. They took thousands of high-resolution photos and hours of high-definition video. They knew what they had found would send shockwaves through the world. They had found physical, tangible evidence that seemed to support one of the oldest and most foundational stories in human history. But here's the catch. This discovery, as monumental as it was, also opened up a massive can of worms. It challenged everything mainstream Egyptology had taught for the last 100 years. And that is why, when the initial findings were quietly shared with certain academics and institutions, the reaction was not excitement. It was silence.
Like, this would be the biggest find ever for archaeology, right? And you can't hear anything about it. I don't know how I came across this. But anyways, so now let's listen to the account regarding Ron Wyatt. Let's hear a little bit about him and what he found originally. And then we're going to actually read through the biblical account. All right, let's check out what they said about Ron.
Critics often say, oh, it's just a random shipwreck. But here's the deal. This isn't a shipwreck. It's hundreds of military chariots, all from the same time period, all found in a linear path on the only plausible land crossing in the entire Gulf. That's not a coincidence. That's a scene. This unique path wasn't found by accident. One man claimed it was there all along. The vindication of a madman? This entire incredible story, the secret expedition, the sonar maps, the frozen Egyptologists, it all goes back to one man. A man who was not a professor, not a famous archaeologist, and not part of the academic elite. His name was Ron Wyatt, and for decades, the entire world thought he was a complete crank. So here's the deal with Ron Wyatt. He was a nurse anesthetist from Tennessee. He was also a passionate, deeply religious, self-taught biblical adventurer. Driven by an unshakable, literal belief that the stories in the Bible were physical, locatable history, he spent his life and his own money trying to find the physical proof. He was the definition of an amateur, an outsider, and that's putting it lightly. In the 1970s, Wyatt became obsessed with finding the true Red Sea crossing. He dismissed the traditional Reed Sea theories, small, marshy lakes in northern Egypt. He followed the biblical clues, which he believed pointed to a massive body of water deep enough to drown an army. His search led him to the Gulf of Aqaba, and specifically to the massive mountain-locked beach of Nuweiba. He reasoned with simple logic that if this was the spot where the Israelites were trapped, then this must be the spot where the sea parted. And if that was true, then the remains of Pharaoh's army must be at the bottom of the Gulf, right on that underwater land bridge. So in 1978, armed with basic scuba gear, a small boat, and a lot of faith, he did something no one else had bothered to do. He dived down. What he claimed to find was exactly what the new $10 million expedition just verified. He reported seeing coral-encrusted chariot wheels. He even claimed to have recovered a hub from one. He took blurry, grainy underwater photos, which were easy to dismiss as interestingly shaped coral. But he didn't stop there. On later dives, he claimed to have found more. He reported finding human bones and horse bones, all mixed in with the chariot parts. And he made his most explosive claim of all. He said he had found and filmed the legendary golden chariot wheel gleaming faintly beneath the coral. When Ron Wyatt presented his findings, the academic world didn't just ignore him. They ridiculed him. They tore him apart. He was labeled a fraud, a pseudoscience peddler, and a religious zealot who was just seeing what he wanted to see. Egyptologists and archaeologists were frozen in a state of complete and total dismissal.
Okay, so I'm going to start reading from Exodus 14. This is super exciting. I'm going to read from Exodus 14, and I think I'm going to read the whole thing here because it is such a cool story, and I don't want to just read that one part. I want to actually get the background of it and everything, because there was some stuff going on faith-wise with the Israelites, and that's the stuff we run into with our faith when we're between a rock and a hard place, right? This is the ultimate here. Okay, let's start. Chapter 14 in Exodus, verse 1. The Lord told Moses, "Tell the Israelites that they are to turn back and camp in front of Pi-hahiroth, between Migdol and the sea. You are to camp in front of Baal-zephon, opposite it by the sea. Pharaoh will say about the Israelites, they're wandering aimlessly in the land, and the desert has closed in on them. I've made Pharaoh's heart stubborn, so he will pursue them. But I'll receive honor by means of Pharaoh and his army, so that the Egyptians will know that I am the Lord. So this is what the Israelites did. Okay, so you see, God's already setting this up. Even though it looks like Pharaoh's going after them, the Israelites are scared. They don't know what to do. So God is saying that, hey, I'm going to be honored by what happens next. And so this is what the Israelites did, starting verse 5. When the king of Egypt was told that the people had fled, the minds of Pharaoh and his officials changed toward the people. And they said, what have we done in releasing Israel from serving us? So Pharaoh had his chariot prepared and took his troops with him. He took 600 of the best chariots and all the other chariots of Egypt with officers in charge of each one. The Lord made the heart of Pharaoh, king of Egypt, stubborn, and he defiantly pursued the Israelis as they were leaving. The Egyptians pursued them, all the chariot horses of Pharaoh, along with his horsemen and army, and they overtook them camped by the sea near Pi-Hatheroth in front of Baal-Zephon. As Pharaoh approached, the Israelis looked up, and there were the Egyptians bearing down on them. Extremely frightened, the Israelis cried out to the Lord. They also told Moses, was it because there were no graves in Egypt that you took us out here to die in the desert? What have you done to us by bringing us out of Egypt? Is this not what we told you in Egypt when we said, leave us alone and let us serve the Egyptians? Indeed, it would have been better for us to serve the Egyptians than to die in the desert. See, what they're working on is what they can see. What they're basing their faith, what they're putting their faith in is what they can tell, meaning it's only what they can see, hear, taste, touch. They're not working in faith, true faith. They're thinking on a earthly realm. They're not thinking about the spiritual realm. Now Moses is, though. Moses knows. He doesn't know everything about this, but he knows God will save them. But the people are totally frightened because they see, oh man, this is a tough situation, and they're not basing their faith in God. So they're thinking, oh, we're going to die. Why did you bring us out here? We could have died in Egypt. At least over there, we wouldn't be all scared, right? And that's what happens to us sometimes. We get all lost like that. When we see or that it appears that the situation is dire and that we can't get out of it. It seems like a rock and a hard place. It's too hard for us to get out. We don't get it. Now we're just stressed out. But we have to have faith. Are we following God's plan? Are we listening to God? Moses was listening to God. He was following God. They were following Moses. So literally they were in God's will in this whole thing. But they didn't believe God could bring them through. And they're basing everything on what they see. Right? This earthly plane. They're not thinking about, hey, there's another realm here that we don't see. Now, the Israelites are scared. They're freaking out. So they're going at Moses now, saying, hey, we could have died in Egypt. Why do we have to die out here now in the desert, all freaked out? And then Moses told the people this. He said, don't be afraid. Stand still and watch how the Lord will deliver you today, because we will never again see the Egyptians whom you are looking at today. The Lord will fight for you while you keep still. That's right. Be still and know that I'm God. That's what he's telling them right there. Moses is speaking for God when he says, don't be afraid, just be still. Watch how God's going to deliver you. And then he actually tells them what's going to happen. It's a prophecy here. He says, because you will never again see the Egyptians. Then the Lord told Moses, why are you crying out to me? Tell the Israelis to move out. You are to raise your staff, stretch out your hand over the sea, and divide it, so that the Israelis may go through the middle of the sea on dry land. Even now I'm hardening the heart of the Egyptians, so they'll go after the Israelis. Then I'll receive honor by means of Pharaoh and all his army, his chariots, and his horsemen. Then the Egyptians will know that I am the Lord when I receive honor by means of Pharaoh, his chariots, and his horsemen. Then the angel of God, who was going in the front of the camp of Israel, moved behind them. The pillar of cloud also moved from in front of them and stood behind them, coming between the camp of the Egyptians and the camp of Israel. The cloud remained there even in the darkness, illuminating the night, so that the one side did not come near to the other all night. So there's some confusion. The Egyptians couldn't get to the Israelites there. Couldn't find them. God made it so because he was preparing things. He told Moses, hey, stretch out your hand over the sea and divide it. Boom. So he does it, right? God tells him what's going to make him receive glory. And he says these specific things that he'll receive honor by. He says this in verse 17, in the last part of 17, it says this, then I'll receive honor by means of Pharaoh and all his army, his chariots, and his horsemen. Those are the things that he's going to receive honor by. And we're going to see that in a second here. But Pharaoh, his army, his chariots, and his horsemen. And you look at this archaeological find, and what do you find? You find those four things. That's what they found. That's what Ron Wyatt found way back when, and that's what they found in 2024. They found Pharaoh's stuff, his army stuff, his chariots, and his horsemen. meaning the bones, the chariots, human bones, you got horse bones, you got chariot parts, you got chariot wheels. All the evidence is there. And then in verse 21, it says this, "Then Moses stretched out his hand over the sea, and the Lord caused the water to retreat by a strong east wind all night, turning the sea into dry land. As the waters were divided, the Israelis went into the middle of the sea on dry land, and the waters formed a wall for them on their right and on their left. The Egyptians pursued all the horses of Pharaoh, his chariots, and his horsemen, and they went into the middle of the sea after them. In the morning watch, the Lord looked down on the Egyptian camp through the pillar of fire and cloud, and he threw the Egyptian camp into confusion. He made the wheels of their chariots wobble, so that they drove them with difficulty. The Egyptians said, 'Let's flee from Israel because the Lord is fighting for them and against us.' Then the Lord said to Moses, 'Stretch out your hand over the sea, and the water will come back over the Egyptians, over the chariots, and over their horsemen.' Moses stretched out his hand over the sea, and the water returned to its normal depth at daybreak." So see, like he said, it stayed up all night. And then the Lord caused a little confusion. He caused some things to happen to their chariots, so it'd slow them down, give time for the Israelites to get all the way across on dry land. And then it also slowed them down, so they were in the middle of the sea. And then daybreak, right? It happened all night. And then at daybreak, the water returned. The Egyptians tried to retreat in front of the advancing water, but the Lord destroyed the Egyptians in the middle of the sea. Verse 28. The water returned, covering the chariots and the horsemen of the Pharaoh's entire army that had pursued the Israelis into the sea. Not a single one of them remained. But the Israelis walked through the middle of the sea on dry land, and the water stood like a wall for them on their right and on their left. On that day, the Lord delivered Israel from the hand of the Egyptians, and Israel saw the Egyptians dead along the seashore. When Israel saw the great force by which the Lord had acted against the Egyptians, the people feared the Lord, and they believed the Lord and Moses, his servant. Wow. Wow. Powerful story, powerful miracle, powerful God. Does all these things in detail, tells them what he's going to do in advance, tells them to be still, know that he is God, relax, and then he tells Moses, "Hey, stretch out your hand, let's do this." Moses does it, and then a miracle happens. The sea parts, held up by the winds on each side, and they're walking through dry land all through the night. And so that the Egyptians don't catch up, God makes their wheels get all wobbly. They get stuck in the mud. They're having trouble getting through the dry land that the Israelis just walked through. And it slows them down, and they're in the middle of the sea all through the night is when they're trying to do this. And then at daybreak, he tells Moses, "All right, close it up." He closes it up, and the Egyptians are done. Pharaoh's army is done. Because you're going after God's people. Doesn't that give you confidence? Doesn't that give you trust in the Lord? And I don't mean having confidence where you're saying, hey, you're happy that the Egyptians died or whatever. But no, we don't boast over the calamity that befalls our enemies. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about the trust and confidence you have in the Lord for any problem that you run into. Think about this miracle. This is a massive miracle. You don't think God does miracles today? He does miracles today. He does miracles today all the time. You just have to open your eyes to see it. It may be small miracles. It may be huge miracles like this one. Even this find is like a huge miracle. This guy, Ron Wyatt, basically by himself, self-funding his thing. And he was from Tennessee. He's not this rich guy, but he's funding what he believed God had led him to do. And then he finds this path with all the archaeological evidence, all stuck in the ground. And the coral had kind of preserved it by growing over it. No one believes him. They don't use their time. They think it's a waste of time. And then part of this documentary, it talks about how some of the pieces were being taken over the decades, like removed. The stuff that it was there is no longer there. There's some stuff that's been dragged away. Yeah, that's someone against God. They're trying to not allow God's miracles to be seen. But they were still able to find enough stuff, enough evidence, and this new team came out, documented it, and of course you don't see it anywhere. But God's word never returns void. And God said it, and God did it. And this is a miracle in and of itself. God's word is confirmed by this find. It's awesome. Like, I love when God gets his props, And, he's not like me. I'm like, yeah, God. But God's just like, what do you mean? I know. I created everything. I know. But when it gets revealed to us, like when it gets revealed to me and I get to see these things come to pass, because the Bible gets proven again, never gets proven wrong, always gets proven right, always gets confirmed. They always try to prove it wrong. And then later on, the evidence comes up, it surfaces, and God's right again. And he's like, I know. And we're like, yes, man, such a good find. Such a good find. Well, that's the show for today. Thanks for joining me. My name is Clint Armitage. This is the Radio Coffee House. Another awesome show. Thanks for coming by. Thanks for listening in. Until next time, stay safe and God bless. Thanks for joining us for another episode of the Radio Coffee House Show, where we're all about Jesus, coffee, and radio. We'll see you next time.